I'm sitting down today with David Stock, who is a former teacher at Loretto School in Scotland, a private school in Scotland. David blew the whistle on abuse that was happening at the school, and we're joining him today to hear his story. David, I'd just like to start off, if I may, just a little bit about you, how you got into teaching, and how you came to be at Loretto.
Right. I can't begin at the beginning, I guess, but I wandered quite a long time after being at several universities. Was in Paris. My main literature degree is Dublin, and then I studied anthropology and Japanese in Vancouver. And then I just felt like wandering about, so I did a whole lot of different jobs, which I think is interesting insofar as it probably didn't make me typical at Loretto. I worked shipbuilding, logging, worked on a cattle ranch for a bit, a whole lot of things. Anyway, then I won't go into my private history, but I got engaged to marry, and then I needed a job, so I started applying to teach. And I really wanted to teach College of Further Education, probably liberal studies. Tried 132 job applications, got some really peculiar interviews. Anyway, so sort of out of the blue, because I was getting desperate, I applied once only to private school. And they'd been in a real mess before. They'd had a teacher who I think had done a Shakespeare play in a week, which would normally take rather longer. So I got the job.
Okay. So this is Loretto, as I understand, the oldest private school in Scotland, is that right?
Yeah.
Could you just very briefly an outline of Loretto's history, just roughly, so we can place it in time?
I can't really, because it never really interested me much. I know people went on about it a bit, but I don't think us as teachers, we didn't. There was a big thing at the beginning on healthy lifestyle, open collar to the air, cold showers, no heating in the bedroom. The code, the motto of the school, Spartam Nactus Hanc Exorna, I think meant, be happy you're back in Sparta. So in fact, even when I was there, I started under Bruce Lockhart, whom I got on with. The classrooms were really cold. A friend of mine took a thermometer in the end, and he started sometimes at 9 degrees centigrade. Eventually, I went to McMurray, the headmaster, and I said, "Look, do you realise how cold it is?" He actually got the heating system changed quite quickly. No, I never was interested in history, because it came into it a little bit, because at one point Drummond, who boasted in his interview that he probably knew more about the history of Loretto than the Board of Governors, took a carriage, with horse carriage, to go into Edinburgh to Fetis to echo what a previous headmaster had done for the special rugby match. Took the whole school with him, running.
Running, okay.
Yeah, well, walking, I suppose, some of them, yeah.
Okay, so this brings us to headmaster. So you mentioned David Bruce McMurray.
Yeah.
And then he was replaced by Norman Drummond.
Yeah.
And it's really about Norman Drummond that the problem started.
Yes, I would say on the topic of bullying, that I never knew about things, though actually I must have just missed a paedophile who was in the school. But that was a separate question, because we chat with staff who'd been there, and did you not notice, and things like that. But otherwise, under Bruce Lockhart, the topic never came up. Under McMurray, I ran a little internal magazine, and one boy wrote rather well, fourth former, on bullying, how it was really rather sad, the whole thing. You got bullied in the third form, and then by the fourth form you thought, oh, I'll get my own back. And I put that in a little magazine, and I got hell, because parents might read it. Well, I thought at the time parents would actually think, here's a school that's open about bullying, so it shouldn't be a problem. I mean, when I look at what's in the newspapers now coming out about abuse, it's absolutely normal in boarding schools. So I'd have thought, had he been open about it, it would have been a good thing.
I'd like you to explain how Norman Drummond was appointed and the sort of qualifications he had, and your initial impressions of him as a headmaster. If you could take us through that, if you would.
Right. Could go on for ages on that, I think. First thing about him is that we soon learn he lies. He lies in the abuse inquiry, saying he was invited to become headmaster by McMurray. Now, McMurray had been housemaster in Fettes beforehand, and he would have had pals there. And what I've heard subsequently, and I heard on the phone actually at the time, went to someone I was phoning at Fettes about a hockey match. They said that Drummond had been a disaster there. Now, he makes out he was a teacher in the army and things, but he was just a chaplain. He didn't actually know about teaching at all.
Did he have any teaching qualifications?
No. But then, mind you, nor did I, except I got inspected by the Scottish authorities, and they okayed me. I mean, I got a certificate. So there was one time he was asked to teach. It's a minor point, but it's just part of him. He was asked by Ian Ebbage, who was in charge of classics at Loretto, if he could possibly help out with one form, with a book. I'd been asked to do that and done it. It was quite interesting. And he gave me this text on Roman civilization and so on. Well, by the end of the year or term, whichever it was, Norman Drummond had just talked about the Celts. And that was a bit much, given he'd been asked to do some background, presumably, for the kids who might go on in classics. Anyway, sorry, what else do I need answer?
Well, how did he get the job?
I think through Selby Wright. Selby Wright was really important to him. Selby Wright was named, I think, by him, Drummond, for a whole lot of enterprises. I think he got financial backing even. And then, of course, it was found Selby Wright was a paedophile. So he dropped that. Now, Ebenezer, forget his past name, he was a journalist in Glasgow. He wrote quite an interesting article suggesting it was all fixed up to get this job by Selby Wright. And I think it was, but he pretends he was invited by McMurray. Now, I know from a friend of mine who was head of modern languages at Loretto that actually McMurray's wife and he loathed Drummond. Now, I think they would have probably realised what Drummond was like early on, and they would have heard from Fettes. I consider him a complete charlatan, but a lot of people find him a good orator. But of course, as an English teacher, I and my friends in the arts world saw through this, but a lot of people didn't. So he came and he fired someone. A pupil. He kicked out a boy early on, and I think that was an act, almost pre-planned, to try and look tough. Because after that, the kid was thrown out for making nasty racist comments to someone. I don't think for hitting him, but for bullying him in that way. But later, Drummond just hid abuse when he found out about it.
Okay, and this the Selby Wright connection. Am I right in remembering that Norman Drummond did the eulogy at Selby Wright's funeral? Was that or him?
I don't know, but yes, probably. Because I mean, they were very close. I think his charity on Sky, what's it called? I forget it. Doesn't matter. I think it had originally.
Was it Columba?
Yeah, Columba 2,400 or 1,400. But I think there was a connection there. But there were a lot of.
It used to be named after Selby Wright. They changed its name when.
And I think he's got other businesses. He's got he gives talks on an international circuit, etc. I know Selby Wright, when I've looked a bit into his life, comes up a lot. But now that's all been hidden, because of course then Selby Wright was not the person to be pals with.
Okay. So I mean, this brings us to the start of your whistleblowing, or when you started to become aware of there being a problem. And you set the boys some essays, and this revealed a lot of information. If we could start with why you set that essay. Did you have an inkling that something was wrong? No?
No, not in the least. What happened was, this happened at the time of Esther Ranson starting up Childline, or very soon after. So there were lots of articles in the news. One I remember reading, and in fact it was put up in the staff room, I think, by someone, was that a good school would openly talk about it and have a policy. So one day in the common room, Adrian Shepherd, who was a maths teacher, mentioned her boy was having a hard time in the house. That it didn't go much further. I know they were dealing with it. But then at I think about the morning I set these essays, no, in fact, not long. I think we talked about it several mornings, because Dorothy gives an account of this. So we talked about lack of motivation, which I'd mentioned before all this to Drummond, in a self-assessment form. And we wondered if there was a connection between that and being bullied. In fact, I know subsequently one boy wrote to the abuse inquiry, I think, saying that he learned as he was bullied for being a worker to put his head down and slowly did less and less work, academic work. Anyway, so we were having these talks, I think maybe for 3 times in our coffee break. And it was agreed that I should write a paper on motivation to put to a common room meeting. So just randomly, really, I hadn't planned it. I went to my class, I think it was that morning, and I said, there's a bit of argument about what I said by the kids, but of course 30 years later they can't remember. But I know I went in there and said, I would like you to write whatever you can about bullying, your views on it, what you know to be true, and try and separate what you know from what you may have heard about. And I just let them get on with it. They knew me quite well. I taught them for a year already. And then, of course, when I looked at the writing next day, because I didn't think it was a rush, well, I had other things going on, I just got a hell of a fright. Because they were talking about, well, the most important thing was, there'd been one particular boy, can I name him?
It's up to you if you're happy to name him.
Well, I won't then, but I'll call him M. Right. He was the head of house. He was getting into pupils' beds, biting them, putting his penis in another boy's face. In fact, when I put the writings together, it was pretty obviously true, because there were 1 or 2 people saying this happened to me, others said I saw it. And he'd beat them. He had a belt that he called Billy the Belt Buckle, and a cricket bat, Charlie, I think it was. I don't know how hard he hit them with, but I know some of the boys talked about crying. I think it was him. He's not always named, but in all the essays, what happens is that quite often they mention the bat, Charlie the bat. So I can work out it's this M. And anyway, the worst thing in the essays that came out was that apparently Drummond had been told. Now, he'd been told the term before I left, which means something like June 1991. Now, how he'd been told was that something like 5 boys, it was never totally clear to me, because I didn't see them all, but I think it was 5 boys were seen bullying by some parents who reported them. I don't know how the parents got the boys' names, but anyway, Drummond then summoned them. All at once, I think. At first I thought not, but I think it was all at once. Now, he summoned them to his study, And in the study was, well, I will mention him, Alistair Morrison, the head of school. Now, the head of school, well, let's go there in a moment. So these boys were called to the headmaster. Now, they didn't want to be punished, so they said, what we've done, it just doesn't compare to what M and others are doing, but particularly they noted it was this head of the Pinky House, sexual things. And one of the things they mentioned then was that a boy had been forced to put a deodorant stick up his arse, forced to, in front of about 13 people, kids, which is pretty damaging, I think.
Yeah. So isn't it? So you got the essays. You were aware of this.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question obviously is then, well, what's the next steps? What did you do? What did you do to raise the alarm within the organisation that there was a problem here?
Right. I'll mention a little bit about the abuse inquiry, because they tried to make out first that I believed them completely. Well, of course, the thing is, there's always these stories about boys or girls who talk about abuse and aren't believed. Well, there was so much that I felt pretty sure, but I thought I'll have to check. Now, I was actually very worried because I knew Drummond had tried before to get rid of me in really sneaky ways, which you can ask me about later. I mean, really underhand ways. So I felt in immense danger. So I thought, well, step one is I don't want these kids going around saying, oh, Mr. Stock believed us immediately. I mean, let's use the word vaguely, I believed them, but I wasn't 100% sure. So I wrote a little statement at home, typed it, to take in the next time I saw the kids. And I said, I forget the exact wording of it. I've got it, the copy still. What I was saying was that I've heard what you've said. I promise I'm going to do something about it. But I am not saying absolutely that I believe you. I need to make further inquiries, but I am not going to forget you. And I had a boy sign that's what I'd said. So I still felt pretty frightened, really, because I knew Drummond wanted rid of me. He'd set spies on me, for instance. I know a girl who came once to me and said, would you like an assistant in the library? And I said, yeah, that'd be really great. So I put a notice up about that in the staff room, so people would know, and then so it would go on her file. And then she came to me a week later and said, I think I should tell you that Mr. Drummond said if anything goes wrong in the library, come and tell me, not Mr. Stock. And I had all sorts of games like that. Anyway, back to the abuse. I consulted Dorothy, my head of department, and she actually made photocopies of all this, the essays. And then we agreed the next step, and there wasn't there were no written plans in the school about complaints, procedures, etc., etc. So I thought, well, the obvious thing is go to the chaplain. He's important in pastoral affairs. So Dorothy, I think, set up the meeting with the chaplain and two of the boys who'd been summoned the previous term. I've got to make this clear. What these kids wrote about was Drummond being told in around June by 4 or 5 boys of abuse. And I hadn't really finished there. What happened after that was the next day, the head of school, who was really close to Drummond, he moved house in order to be close to Drummond, like a sort of secretary. He was obviously sent by Drummond to go over to Pinky, where all these key witnesses came from, because that's where M came from, and told them, don't you ever say anything about this. And I think about a week later, the most unafraid of those boys, the one I talked to most, was thrown out. So he knew the previous term to when I set the essays, right? So he had been.
So you felt not only because of feeling that your job was at risk, but because of his conduct that you couldn't just take it to the headmaster, so you were looking for another.
The headmaster was well known he'd lie and play games. I mean, I would have had to have a witness. And I mean, I could, well, that would be the end of me. If I'd gone, I mean, I didn't think he could get out of this. It was fairly obvious he'd done it. But I certainly was never absolutely sure. And I thought, well, if I went to him with a witness, said, here I come, I got a witness, I go to interview now. Did you or not? Here, that would have been the end of me. As it was, it was the end of me. So anyway, had this talk with the two boys, with the chaplain, and they came out with this previous term Drummond knew and some other stuff. And I wrote up a summary of this meeting and asked the chaplain to sign it later, which he did, which I have. And then discussed with Dorothy what to do next. And I thought, well, I couldn't possibly go to the headmaster straight away. I think if I had a lot of time, I should have gone to the common room president. We'd had meetings for a certain amount of time, but we weren't really very strong. And a lot of the staff, mortgages, etc., were really rather timid. I don't know if it would have worked, but it might have been safer for me if I'd gone to Ken and said, can we have a staff meeting? I could have read out the papers and handed it to them, but I didn't. I thought, right, I'll go and involve the deputy headmaster, known as vice-gerent at Loretto. Well, I phoned him up, and of course I had to explain. This was maybe 3 days after the essays. I'm never quite sure about the timing. I've got dates of the essays, and I've got a rough date of when the headmaster, so the essays were set in November the 1st, I think. And the previous term, when Drummond was told, was before half term. That's actually documented. He lies about that later. So anyway, thought, next step, Dorothy arranged to bring the boy. I'd spoken to him. I haven't given his name, have I? The deodorant boy. Mm-hmm. I'd said, are you happy to talk about this? And he was. I said, look, I won't go into details about what you had to do in front of other people, because the chaplain the chaplain was there when I interviewed other kids, but not this boy. So I said, the chaplain will be there and the deputy, and I won't go into nitty-gritty details. But anyway, I had to get William Durrant, the vice-gerent, to come along. I phoned him up and I had to explain the background. I said, look, I've set essays and I found out that there's been sexual assault and serious bullying in the house, and Drummond's been told about it, and it looks like he did nothing. Whether I said he shot it up, I don't know. Anyway, I had to go on and on to persuade him to come. And I said to him in the end, I said, look, I'll blacken your name if you don't come. No, I didn't say I'll go to the newspaper. That would have been the end of me. But that's how he took it. Anyway, he did come along. I had a tape recorder from the English department, so I taped all this. And it was fairly straightforward. I said to Brown, were you made to do this? And the key things was, I said, have you told the headmaster? Because he was, so I haven't been all that clear, he was one of the naughty boys, I'll call them, who were summoned in June because they'd been found bullying. But I'd not found him to talk to him with the chaplain earlier, right? Is that okay? Clear? Mm-hmm. So I said, are you absolutely sure you told the headmaster? And he said, yes. And so I went through the same questions as I did with the chaplain, the previous chat with the several boys. I said, did you ever hear anything about it later? Were you told anything about I'll act on this? He said, no, just nothing happened. So what amazed me in the little interview was that William Durrant, at one point, he's an old boy. I mean, the old, really a bit fossilized, I think, old boy from Loretto. Everything is lovely in Loretto, you know. Dorothy used to argue with him and say, look, don't you think that the dormitory system with older boys in charge of young one is dangerous? Not perfectly well, worked all right with me. So anyway, I was amazed in the taped interview with this boy. He suddenly said, oh, was it a prank? And I thought, now, who for a prank is going to put a deodorant stick up their own anus with 12 boys watching? Anyway, I don't think that at the end of that interview, William Darren said to me, I'll deal with this. I think it was just left like that. The boy, the deodorant kid, Dorothy was very good on this, thought, well, he may be disturbed. He's agreed to come along. We've not gone into awkward details. But I've arranged a meeting next day so he can meet in the chaplaincy centre with his housemaster and the chaplain, just to check he's okay on all this. Now, the only other thing about all this, the background, is that I had twice, I think, if not 3 times, phoned the Scottish Society for Protection of Children, name like that. And they'd been adamant that had a meeting actually at one point. I never gave the name of the school. I just said, look, things have been going on. They had a meeting and they said, right, by law now, you have to do all you can to protect the children. You can't just back out. That I'd known, I think, after the essays and before the first interview. And then they said to me, when I phoned them next time, when I said, look, I'm exhausted, I've had it. I went to the doctor, I can't sleep. I mean, I've never known like that. I think 3 nights running, no sleep at all. I was just hyper. But not having a breakdown, as people thought. I mean, plain exhaustion and anxiety, not mental sickness. So I went to the doctor and I said, look, can you deal with this? And then I realised, talking to him, there's no point going on sleeping pills. They're opiates. They're a bad thing. So I could go home instead. I think he said 5 days off. And then I thought, hold on, if it's 5 days, then the headmaster can come and look at the files. You know, it's not so much hidden. So I went back to Eddie Maguire and said, no, hold on, can you make it, 2 days? As it is, the school doctor, I think, chatted about it with Drummond. So I went home. But before I went home, I did what I was told to do, which was pretty staggering, really. I was told to go into the staff room, not give a sort of preamble, just to come out with a statement that was something like, there have been allegations of serious abuse within the school. If this means putting more staff into the dormitories, so be it. Well, they thought I'd flip my lid. Suddenly saying this in the middle of people having coffee. Well, I hadn't flipped my lid. I mean, I was just exhausted. But the upshot of that was that things started going on in the background. I'm pretty sure it was Drummond who set it in motion.
Right, so this brings us to the next point, right? So you've raised the alarm, you've identified the problem, you've raised the alarm with your head of department, with the chaplain who's head of pastoral care, and with the deputy head of the school. The headmaster's obviously aware.
But I don't know at what point he became aware, but William Darren went to him after I'd flipped my lid and reported to him then. I don't think much time had passed since the deodorant interview. But anyway.
So the headmaster becomes aware. Okay. So what's the official response? All right, you've blown the whistle, you said there's a problem, you've got evidence, you've reported it. The official response was what?
Well, that's rather complicated. There are no minutes on this in the government. There's no mention of this in the governor's minutes at all. Now, what had happened was, I really was actually freaking out with worry. I shouldn't use freaking out. I think I was nuts. I was down with a friend of mine in Peebles, and I phoned up one of the art teachers, Jonathan, because I thought I'm in such danger with this. I just want to hear some of his complaints about Drummond interfering with the pay scale for a friend of his at work, one or two other things. I just wanted corroboration. And anyway, he was not a very pleasant fellow, actually. He liked creating a stir, which he certainly did. For instance, he ran an art gallery and he brought up a transvestite prostitute to it, because a Chinese woman had made artworks of the prostitute's activities. And he had a fanfare at Waverley when the transvestite prostitute came up and the artist in the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh. So he had a pipe band meet them all. And then he said, oh, God, will Drummond find out? I think he really liked dramas. But anyway, he phoned up Norman Drummond. And I don't know if he mentioned David Stock's finding out about bullying, but he told him I'd written a poem about Drummond. And he also said to him, David Stock said in the staff room, I wonder if Drummond will send a burglar to my house to get hold of the essays. Well, I mean, I hardly would think he would do that. He wouldn't know the professional burglar, and they might not be in my house. It was my nasty sense of humour. But that all got to Drummond. Now, I'm pretty sure that then he set the wheels in motion to be rid of me. Because what happened, when you're saying what happened officially, was I was contacted by the hard man, Alan Johnson, Dean of the Faculty of Advocates, who was a governor, and in charge of, amongst the governors, in charge for sort of liaison with staff. He phoned me up, said, don't come back on the campus, you may not. I'll come and talk. Now, Dorothy thought, well, we'll have a discussion, we'll find a way through it. But when he arrived at my door with another lawyer, whom I taught as a kid, I had no legal representation. As he came through the door, he started saying, there are 5 allegations made against you. One was this, I said, it's a joke about Drummond finding a professional burglar to get the essays from my house and the poem. Nobody knew whether the poem was a mild or nothing, just a poem about him. I forget the other ones. Anyway, I had no chance to speak. Dorothy gave an account of this to the abuse inquiry. Well, that was it. He said the bridges are down between you and he never mentioned the bullying. I don't think when Drummond set the wheels in motion by contacting the chairman of the governors, who then got the hit man, he was a really bully boy, Alan Johnson, to come. I don't think that there was any mention of bullying. So when Alan Johnson came to my house with Dorothy there to sort of help me out, at the end of it, I said, look, here's the essays on the bullying, and here's a tape recording. He didn't talk about it, took them away, and then later he wrote to me and
I've got the letter here. It's quite interesting. Right. So, Dear David, this is from Alan Johnson, then QC, Dean of the Faculty of Advocates, and writing as governor. It says, Dear David, I am grateful to you for seeing me last Friday afternoon at your home. I confirm that the meeting was at my request, having been commissioned by the chairman on behalf of the governors to investigate and report upon the circumstances which have led to the present state of affairs.
That's a bit
which is
vague, isn't it?
Very vague.
I think it was the poem. I think, yeah.
You attended this meeting voluntarily, accompanied by 2 persons of your choice.
Which is not true.
Namely, the head of department and the chaplain.
The chaplain wasn't there.
The chaplain wasn't there, okay. I was accompanied by the clerk, purely for the purposes of recording the exchanges. I confirm also that you gave me copies of certain writings and a tape.
Yeah.
Since Friday, I've had the opportunity of discussing the circumstances with a number of members of staff, including the headmaster, and have reached certain conclusions. There seem to me to be 2 wholly separate issues. In the first place, there is a natural concern of any teacher for the health and safety of his or her pupils. Accordingly, that any teacher should be concerned to react to discovery of bullying of any sort is an unanswerable proposition. However, what that reaction is another question. In the second place, there's an absolutely fundamental element that must exist. So that paragraph just dismisses all the bullying. That's it.
Well, no, he comes on to it later.
In the second place, there's an absolute fundamental element that must exist in an institution such as Loretto, namely a degree of trust between the headmaster and every member of his staff, which is mutual and for the benefit of the school and pupils alike. So he's making it about trust. In this whole unfortunate business, okay, interesting choice of word, two immediate things concern me very much. The first is the fact that you should, as a teacher of English with no pastoral duties, and such within the school, be discussing with your form conduct between the boys to the extent inviting them to write essays. This goes far beyond, in my view, what would be reasonably expected of a teacher in class. Now, there's more, I'll get to in a minute. I find that very strange, because this is now an attack on your decision making which revealed the problem. Right? It's not an attack on the problem, it's an attack on the whistleblower and how you got there. Okay. Secondly, it's perfectly plain to me that the extent of your discoveries, whilst disturbing it, they indicate ill treatment, interesting choice of word, amongst boys one to another or a number to one, do not in general terms disclose a sexual abuse ring, or even, to use your own phrase, a culture of violence. They disclose that, unfortunately, within the school there are some unpleasant boys. Again, the choice of word is egregious. Unpleasant boys in school who do unpleasant things, and it is highly desirable that should be stopped. It is perhaps significant that any reference to sexual abuse on the tape interview is raised initially by you, and indeed when you pressed the boy to respond, he denies any such suggestion. Accordingly, I am satisfied from an objective point of view at the time that you are primarily dealing with incidents in the past. Insofar you're dealing with the present, your conclusions are exaggerated. Okay, so that's him. He's now discarded the abuse allegations, and he goes on. However, the second issue is the real point. So none of this is real. None of this is important. The second issue is the real point. There's no doubt in my mind that your proper response to the discoveries you thought you were making, should have been to take the matter directly to the headmaster, who I understand, incidentally, was in school at the time. But even if he was temporarily away, a response from you was not so urgently demanded that you could not have awaited his return. The vice-gerentist, not in the same position, that you should have embarked upon a series of interviews with boys, in particular with the boy, he names them. In the way it was carried out, quite frankly, astounds me. The boy seemed to be remarkably resilient despite it all. Most importantly, however, it fundamentally destroys, in my view, irreparably, the bond of trust that exists between the headmaster and the member of his staff. I cannot avoid at least the thought that you were as much concerned to criticise the headmaster as you were to get to the bottom of what you thought you were investigating. As presently advised, I see no way that that particular bridge can be mended. Furthermore, I'm concerned that your contacts with the two nippers, that's the junior school masters, both of whom reported it to the headmaster with regard to both
that's the art teacher who phoned me up.
Yeah, contract of employment and location of the master's left, imply to me an attempt by you to expand your case against the headmaster. I must attach significance to those actions that have been disclosed voluntarily to me by the means I've described. I'm aware that you apparently took some advice, that you were advised to act, this is probably referring to the NSPCC, SSPCC, apparently against the background of recent legislation, and that part of that advice was the fact that you should not involve the headmaster.
Yeah, they actually said to me, how do you know the headmaster isn't, well, a paedophile? I mean, it's by implication involved. Well, I said, I can't believe that, but, I mean, I never mentioned to them the Loretto's name, and I didn't try, wouldn't have been much point, involving a headmaster suggesting he might be a paedophile. I get accused of, in all this, the primary thing I wanted was to expose Drummond. Well, I was abused as a kid. I know what it feels like. nobody take any notice. No, it was them I was concerned about.
So he continues, however justified to give advice might consider it to be in general terms. If it was looked at in the context of the personalities in the present case, to follow it was totally inappropriate. This is the extent of my thinking at the present time, and I accordingly bring it to your attention as soon as I've been able to. I suggest that you now take advice as to your position. I myself remain available to discuss, blah, blah, blah. In the meantime, I reaffirm the decision I have taken on delegated powers given to me by the chairman, that you do not return to your duties and that you do not appear within the school. You must regard this as an instruction which is legitimately given. So, you were canned immediately, is the bottom line there.
Yeah,
yes?
well, I mean, as I said, Drummond. Well, I mean, I won't tell you it now because it take time. But Drummond went through incredible manipulations and lies to be rid of me. So he wanted rid of me. Way back. This was his chance.
Okay. So you experienced what you might describe as a kangaroo court, right? You walked in, you had this senior lawyer.
I didn't know he walked in. I was in my house.
He walked in.
I mean, Dorothy, well, I wondered later if he had a drink or Dorothy reckons he was in a fury and in a hurry. But I mean, the chaplain wasn't there. I don't know how he could think there's someone else in the room. It was in my little kitchen. You know, how can you?
Well,
my lawyer was disgusted at this. He said, here's a top legal man and you haven't got legal representative in this chap.
yes. I mean, I've experienced a kangaroo court. They're very strange because nothing is normal because the decision's already made. Right, and it's not a normal exchange about the problem.
We didn't have time to speak. Dorothy and I were just stunned. She said she still hasn't recovered from this trauma for her, seeing how people behave.
So that takes us. So you were told not to return. Now that must have then been formalised in some way. So what was the next stage of removing you from post?
Well, my lawyer, my union. It's not a union, but anyway, AMMA, call it a union, were involved, and they sent, after some chat on the phone, I think, sent a lawyer up to meet Anna Johnson in Edinburgh. And I was asked by my lawyer, Imeson, do you want to stay? You know, should we fight to have you stay? And I thought, well, little I know about industrial tribunals is that you don't often win. I mean, you can, but not. They'll dig something up on me anyway. And the other thing is, and apart from that, you know, if he could just simply get it that I do go back, I couldn't operate with. I mean, I knew already Drummond had trying to get rid of me. I mean, I can go into that later if you want, but I mean, the way he did it, lying to my head of department, say that was somebody who was here helping the English department, said, oh, David Stock's trying to take the department in a completely different direction. This is when Dorothy wanted to move to another school and wanted more responsibility. He said, Anna, if you want more responsibility, show responsibility now. I want David fired. And amongst the reasons was I hadn't thanked Lady Elizabeth for drinks. When all the staff, it was part of the job, all the staff at the end of term or beginning term would be over there for drinks, paid for by the school, of course. Everything was paid by the school. And also, there'd been a dinner the school had offered for staff and spouses. Well, I brought a woman I who was actually engaged to. That was disgraceful. So I should go. Blimey.
So you decided that it wasn't worth the fight to try and stay.
I couldn't teach. I couldn't teach knowing he was watching me. I couldn't have done it. So I said, okay. So they found a way out, which was to, the school paid me for another year because then I became age 50 and I didn't know all about this, but there was some formula there and I could get a pension early, which was, I think, about 300 quid a year. Doesn't go very far. And I was also meant to get a decent reference. which I wasn't allowed to see, but I should be a decent one. But Drummond, in fact, when I did get subsequent work, I had been asked to take over the department when the head of Gordonston English department was having a sabbatical, because I knew him a bit. I'd been up there. Drummond was a governor at Gordonston. Put the kibosh on that one. Then, because they were stuck, everybody getting stuck at Glenarmond, because the head of English there had suddenly fallen in love and rushed off, or was about to rush off. They needed someone acting head of department for 2 terms, so I went there. Drummond phoned them up and said, if you've got any discontent there, David Stock will become the leader in the common room. But in fact, the headmaster there, well, I think they were so desperate, took me on, and I chatted with them. I said, look, I want to be open. I'll tell you why I'm suddenly free. It's Norman Drummond hiding abuse, and I'm out. So that was all fine. But Drummond tried to stop me getting any work.
Okay, so and then there was a non-disclosure agreement. So tell
Well, that
us
was part of the package. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about, because I'm very interested in this and the terms of it, which are quite remarkable.
Well, it was actually really quite frightening to me, because I thought, okay, all right, I will keep quiet. I didn't at that time sort of think to myself, is it going to be stressful keeping quiet about this? I promised the kids I'd do what I could, and I had done what I could, and I wasn't really envisaging then going to the newspaper or anything. I'd never got work again. But anyway, this said you can't go to the newspaper or let the word out. And if any of your friends do, I would be responsible. I couldn't believe it. Dorothy, so I knew Dorothy, who knew a fair amount about this, wouldn't, because I'd be in trouble. And I had to make a list later on about now who knows details. And a lot of people could have put, the chaplain, for instance, could have put 2 and 2 together. Well, I didn't contact them all and said, for Christ's sake, don't tell anybody, what was going on. But I was told that if it could be sort of pinned back to me somehow, if others spilled the beans, I'd be liable for any fees the school lost if parents took their kids away because of this. Might have been hard to prove, but yeah. So what happened was, in the end, when they set up the abuse inquiry, Loretto were told, I think randomly, we're going to cover you. Oh, probably not randomly, because way back there was Ray Hill's paedophile there. It was in the newspapers, way back. Term before I got there.
Okay,
really.
So non-disclosure agreement meant that if the word got out and anybody left, they would come after you for the fees lost. Yeah. That was the allegation. So it seems very remarkable to me. And the use of non-disclosure agreements and these things to silence whistleblowers, which is now standard practice, is very much contrary to the interest of child safety and carries on.
There was a bit of confusion in my mind at one point. I don't think it's mattered. I think I blamed the SCAI for not mentioning it. One of the boys later was made to sign the Non-Disclosure Act by Drummond. What happened was, well, I won't give names because he doesn't want his name given out, but this boy was, I think, possibly there just in the school as I left, or came next to him.
How can a boy sign a legal agreement?
Well, I think what will have happened was Drummond studied law. By the way, a friend of mine was pretty sure it was an Agratat degree in law from Cambridge, because he was playing rugby and had a famous rugby injury. It stopped him signing 500 letters. Didn't stop anything else. So he could play hockey. I watched him. No, this boy, he was bullied a lot. And one day, he was actually a bit of a different kid. He'd come from a different background. He hit one of the boys. He turned on a boy. They were catching him in this tunnel that runs under the old A1, linking 2 parts of Loretto. And they were throwing boots at him and stuff. And he hit one in the head. Not a very nice boy either, actually. I taught him. Then he was thrown out by Drummond until he went to see his granddad, who was apparently a war hero, I think, in Edinburgh, and he came back and said, "No, I'm not going. I hit this boy because I'd been bullied intensely for weeks. I'd had enough." And that's when the boy's written to me later. I can't give you his name. And said I was made to sign this document. He doesn't call it an NDA, but a document saying that I undertook never to tell anybody about this. Well, Drummond, with his law degree, will have, well, that's not really relevant, but well, except it is relevant because he threatened the whole staff once with a case of slander because we'd had a common meeting about his lies. It was getting a problem. But anyway, that's what the boy signed. But I'm reckoning, of course, that Drummond will have made a nice legal-looking document, had him sign it, and thrown it in the bin. Now the boy, so there'll be no trace. I think if Drummond was known to have done that, and somebody could, this boy, if he had a copy of it, he doesn't, because he won't be given a copy. Drummond wouldn't want it getting out that he'd made a 17-year-old boy sign a non-disclosure. So no, but the boy would have thought he'd signed it. Help, he's got it, but Drummond would have thrown it away.
So I've got another letter here. So this came much later. This is from the former bursar to you, Norman Nash. Wrote to you. All right. I said, "Dear David, I was amazed when several weeks ago I got a very lengthy letter from the chairman of Loretto Governors. In this letter, he ate buckets of humble pie and apologised for the child abuse at the school. I read the report, and although it has taken 32 years, you are vindicated. We know that Drummond lied to governors, parents, children and staff. I saw evidence of that throughout my miserable 3.5 years association with him. It was his deep-rooted corruption that allowed me to bowl the bastard middle stump and force his resignation. After you left, at no time ever was involved in any discussion about you. I never heard any suggestion you were mentally ill. We'll come back to that because that's a very common theme. Sadly, you were a closed book. However, I was aware that Johnson and Urquhart had played significant roles, although to be fair, a young solicitor was unlikely to challenge a very senior barrister, soon to be a judge. I recently met with Andrew Chapman, and predictably, he too abhors Drummond and all his works. I believe you have a compelling case if you decide to sue the school and Drummond." He goes on to say, "I'll just consult a lawyer. I will give evidence on your behalf if it would help. Drummond is a malevolent beast. He bears grudges, but he is well embedded into the Scottish establishment. His CBE defiles the honours system, but is an illustration of his malign influence." So that's extremely strong, and
Well, he
32 years to be vindicated. So
Drummond tried to get rid of the bursar by making out he'd sold something, school property, stolen.
Right, okay.
He also, by the way, according to one of the other emails from Tank Nash, worked out if he could get rid of William Durham, because William Durham had attended this interview.
So when it started to come out, when you were vindicated 32 years on, how did you react to that? Was it a relief?
I could only guess. Yes, I mean, I think it must have been. But what happened was that it all took time. The school, because I'm on a list of honorary old boys, sent me a circular that, I think I mentioned this earlier, right? They'd been picked, I think, well, no, randomly I thought, but it would be Ray Hill. So we'd been picked to be looked at by the abuse inquiry. We're going to cooperate fully. So that's when I thought, right, can I spill the beans? Because, yeah, I mean, the point was I couldn't immediately, I did lots of emails back and forth, but yeah, no, there's relief. What I wanted, amongst other things, and I wrote always to the headmaster for him to pass on, I said, I want to put a little piece into the school magazine for the kids in the 5A, the ones who set the class. Because I'd actually, the last time I saw them, I'd said, I promise you I'm not going to forget. I'm going to do what I could. And I started to cry, but I hid my face in the corner. I mean, I thought either Drummond will have to go or me, because you couldn't just, it's not just so much that he'd done nothing about abuse, he'd had his head boy threaten people who told him, got rid of one of the little key witnesses, and gave a good reference to the sexual pervert. So I wrote back and forth to them, and eventually, because I thought I might go to a newspaper direct, I said, look, you know, can I come out with it, or will you cancel the NDA I've signed? Well, they didn't know about that, of course, because none of this was minuted. So what was interesting about that was I wrote a lot of emails to Hawley, whom Ken Mark said was a good headmaster. And I said what had gone wrong. And I said, well, of course, the key thing is, you know, you probably won't do it often, but you got a malicious, lying headmaster who's no good. He might look good, but he's no good. And you've got no mechanism, if that happens, for us to do much about it. The headmaster said writes a report on the whole school to the governors. We as staff never saw it. I said, well, one thing is, let that be seen by the staff, let the staff write a report every year, and so on. So that was all turned against me by the abuse inquiry. They wanted to prove that I was being vindictive.
We'll come to the abuse inquiry in a moment, yeah. You mentioned there he gave a reference to perverts. This is the boy M who was abusing the other boys. So tell us about the reference that Drummond gave to that boy.
Well, I only know about this from later, because I used to be quite friendly with the housemaster, Duncan Wiley, in the house where, nearly gave his name away, where M was doing this abuse. And all the writing about abuse all the writing where there were kids saying, this happened to me, came from that house, Pinky House. Right. So I knew Duncan Wiley fairly well. I think things have gone a bit awry since the report came out. But I asked him, in fact, now to go back in time, while I was still in the school, this was buzzing around a little bit, because of course he was involved as a housemaster. He came to find me and he said, David, I promise I didn't know any of this before the essays, which I believe. Now, I could never quite understand why then Duncan later refused to give Mason a good reference and had an argument with Drummond, who said everybody deserves a second chance. I thought they might deserve a sort of second chance, but you don't send that kid to teach other kids, or to run a gym as he does now, I think, and all these naked kids. What baffled me at first was, surely the boy M would have asked for reference soon, i.e. the term he left. But maybe he asked months later, came back. Quite possibly, I hadn't thought that. So anyway, that's what Duncan told me, that he by that time he knew what this boy had been up to. Well, at one point, after the essays were set, and I think weeks later, Drummond tried to do a sort of cover-up, made Duncan in charge of health and safety in the school or something, which I found very peculiar, because he's the one who didn't know what was going on in his own house. Possibly not his fault. Thick walls, he said, he couldn't hear it, but there was a matron there and everything, I don't know. So, yeah.
Okay, so we come to the child abuse inquiry. Okay, so got a few notes here from what Lady Smith found. She said a small number of staff in Loretto abused children. Some children at Loretto engaged in abusive conduct towards other children. Guy Ray Hills, a charismatic and flamboyant teacher at Loretto Junior School, The Nippers, between 51 and 67, was a prolific sexual predator of junior and senior boys. Throughout his tenure, he groomed many children and established abusive sexual relationships with them. Some were one-offs, others lasted for 4 years. Ray Hill's behaviour was widely known by pupils. It was blatant, and headmasters and other staff must also or ought to have known about it.
The headmaster then was Bruce Lockhart.
He was subject to a number of complaints from the 1950s onwards. The response by Loretto to the behaviour of Ray Hills was woefully inadequate. He was allowed to continue working and was feted for his teaching skills up to and after his departure from the school in 1967. Despite the nature and extent of his abuse being appreciated by Loretto, he was allowed to resign and not dismissed. And then, speaking about the events you've described, it says the school's reaction to a member of staff, referring to you, trying to prompt the headmaster to address bullying in 1991 was to dismiss the staff member and focus on protecting the school's reputation. And then, referring obliquely to Drummond, she says, effective leadership was not consistently established and maintained, whilst there were some excellent examples of good leadership, particularly after 1995, so that's after Drummond,
different headmaster.
After Drummond left. Both senior and junior schools suffered from periods of poor leadership. Abuse was not detected, appropriately dealt with, and systems to protect children from abuse were not established. Complacency was common before 1995. Now, of course, before 1995, one of the headmasters was Drummond, and he is now operating a charity to teach leadership to
Well, that's one of its
heads
functions.
of Scottish schools.
I think he probably calls it leadership. They're meant to be poor kids who've had disadvantaged time. I think they're taught leadership too, so they climb up mountains.
Yeah, no, but it's including teachers and
yeah,
heads.
and that there's a special session every now and then for new head teachers. Yeah.
So,
I wonder quite what leadership means to Drummond.
Yes. So that's what they've published. What was your experience of the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, raising these issues with them?
It's quite complicated, really. At first, I just saw some of these statements, and I thought, right, I'm vindicated. And I wrote, I don't know whether I was in response to something, I wrote and said, yeah, that's okay. And then I started looking deeper. And the thing is, it's partly Vanessa triggered me to this. It's actually quite hard to find your way through the document because it's connected with online stuff. I mean, I've got the hard copy of the document, but to understand it fully, you've got to look at the footnotes and people's statements and people's interviews. And when I started looking at those later, I've been helped to do this partly because some of the survivors of abuse in other schools, waiting for their reports to come out, had looked at the Loretto report and they had realised that I was being done before I did. I think they must have gone into the little nitty-gritty and looked at the footnote. It's quite hard finding them too when you get a little footnote to reference. This one I still can't find, though I think they've taken it out. What was happening? It's quite complicated. One, they were talking about me being mentally ill, and as though it went on and on and on. It's extraordinary. I mean, but I just gone to the doctor because I was exhausted. I never went to a doctor about this since. I once had reactive depression. This is why Duncan that says he was highly strung. Well, I mean, I divorced, pretty awful marriage I had, but it was foreign culture. It could be quite difficult. Lost my little 3-year-old kid. He went back to Turkey. I never heard much about him. I'd plead. I said, well, tell him, what little jokes does he do? What does he like? Never heard a thing. So that was quite stressful. And then I broke up with a girlfriend at the time. And, sorry, this is at the time then, when McMurray said to me, David Stock, how do you see your future prospects? And I said, well, I'd like to be head of the department. Well, you won't be, he said. It's not that there's anything wrong with your teaching, it's fine. But I looked out of the window the other day, you were talking to a boy who hadn't pulled his socks up. You don't go to chapel. I said, I told Rab Bruce Lockhart when I came up, I said, I'm sorry, I won't go to chapel. I'm not a believer. I can't pretend I do. And he said, oh, you might go for the singing. So I tried the singing. So, when that was it. I mean, I'm sorry, I just suddenly felt pretty unwanted, useless. So it was actually really quite comic because I think what happened was that Drummond had just come and we had the start of term drinks party. I don't think I pinched his bottom. I think I slapped his bottom and he was leaning over the table. I thought it was the head of art, my friend Stephen Edwards. And then Drummond turned around, it was his bum. Anyway, I don't think that triggered it all, but I can't remember. I went to Eddie Maguire, the doctor, and then he said, I think you better see a psychiatrist, which was good. But I was on these, is it Mogadon pills? Bloody weird. So, and I bought a TV because I kept thinking, the same ideas were coming around in my head of, what I should have said to my girlfriend I'd split up with her. But that was reactive depression. And I know, when I had this, I won't call it a breakdown. They said breakdown. I mean, no, I was just absolutely exhausted and frightened. And so they thought I was behaving oddly. I mean, the only evidence of my having flipped was this. So I go into the common room, we're having tea there. Excuse me, there have been allegations of sexual abuse in the school. Some of you staff will have to go into the dormitories extra. I mean, of course they thought I'd gone bonkers. But nobody ever said any after. But Drummond pretended he was very concerned. This is one of the things in the abuse inquiry. They do not look at contradictions. Now, I'd sent them documentation, because Dorothy actually wrote a report of this weird conversation when Drummond said, fire him, I want to fire him, lied about what an English teacher said and played other little games. Did the same a bit later when a parent had come up to me, a mother, and said, I'm thinking of sending a second daughter here. Is there a school magazine that's uncensored? I used to run the little internal magazine. It was censored so much by Drummond, who wanted everything positive for PR. The girls came to me and said, we're not going to write anymore. So I said, no, we don't have an uncensored magazine. Whoop. She said that at a party at Edinburgh. There was a governor there who came back to the school. And Drummond thought, I can get rid of him for this. Summoned me. And, well, I won't get to the background games. One of his sidekicks said, no, don't have to worry about it. It's just a formality. It wasn't. It was Dorothy said to me, though, don't you talk. So I didn't talk much. I wanted to say to Drummond, was I meant to lie? I'm asked a question by a parent. I know you'd like me to lie. Should I lie for you? I said, I'm not going to. Anyway, so I just kept quiet. Yeah.
So,
do you want to know my other complaints about the SEA?
So the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, they don't check. You said they don't check contradictions.
Well, that was one. Drummond said I'd love him back, and I sent this documentation. They don't either check provenance of these statements because.
Right, so Drummond's view was, I'm very concerned about David, his mental health. I hope he gets well. I'd love to have him back.
I'm having regular meetings to ask about it, including with Tank. That's why Tank said, no, I never discussed your mental health.
And none of it's true.
No.
And it's demonstrably not true. And the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry failed to identify the obvious lies in the statement and gave weight to the statement even with all the contradictions. That's basically what he said. Yeah.
I have to say that when I read the other day, they did give Drummond a bit of a hard time around the key areas. Right now, I told them there were the two key moments. It was at the June time when I wasn't involved. The boys, 5 noughties, told Drummond about M. And then there was my essays the next time. Drummond liked to confuse them. And he changed the date so that Oh, I did learn about abuse and about this naughty boy M 2 days before the end of term. Now, if that had been the case, the boys whom I interviewed said they'd been summoned to Drummond and told him about M a bit before half term. So for the half of the term remaining, Drummond knew about M and abuse, never told the housemaster. So that's one thing. They said at one point, oh, dates don't really matter. I'm sorry, they actually do matter.
Yes.
Because if Drummond was told 2 days before the end of term, it wouldn't be so upsetting to the kids. That's one of the key things Dorothy says that really upset me. It really did. The kids told me in my class, it wasn't in the writing, I discussed things with them too. They said, well, we assumed all the staff knew about M and the abuse going on. For God's sake, can you think my friend Ken Marks knew Dorothy? You think we'd all just sit there, oh, let the abuse go on? Oh, no.
So, is there, before we close up, is there anything else about the child abuse inquiry and the process and how they go about the work you'd like to explore?
Well, one of the head of school, did I give you his name? Morrison. He's a headmaster now.
Okay.
The head of the school used to be before the last year, was head boy in Pinkie House. Now the tradition was that if he was to become not just prefect but the head of the school, he would move to schoolhouse and be near Drummond's study because he was really close. So that left M became head boy. Now they're really close. One of them was best man to the wedding of the other. They were real pals. Now it's utterly clear to me that Drummond and Morrison must have had a little chat on protecting Morrison's pal M a bit in the house. Now, I'd have thought that, what then happened was that several people, not very many, wrote to the school, because I don't think much of their advertising, really, they should have pressed hard, forced all these schools to include a little message from the abuse inquiry in their magazine, which reaches all the old boys, including abroad. They didn't do that. They advertised in newspapers here. Well, a lot of the key boys, like the one with the ANDA, didn't know. They didn't know at the start the abuse inquiry. Anyway, what happened was that Drummond obviously invited, well, I'll call them his pals, because he stayed very close to a lot of the kids later. It was extraordinary. He made a sort of ex-prefect society for a while, and he became president of the Old Boys Society for quite a while. I think he used people. Anyway, so quite a few of these kids, like 3 who wrote in, were from my class, my 5th form. Well, one I'm trying to deal with at the moment, he wrote in and said I was always criticising the school and Drummond in particular in class. I said, absolute lie, but that suits Drummond. He was invited to write that in, almost word by word. Drummond's, oh right, sorry, that's one boy. And I'm in contact with another boy who was in the class. I said, is this true? And he said, no. And you can contact him if he wants. He's not prepared to put it on paper, but he will talk to you. Because he said that's nonsense. So that's one of the writings sent to the SCAI. They won't know about that, but they should know that one of the other ones is in fact Morrison with a fake name, now a headmaster, writing in to say, yes, Drummond's got it right. The chat with the boys was 2 days before the end of term. This boy Morrison also sandwiches the 2 main events when the 4 or 5 boys were summoned by Drummond and told him my essays. Because, of course, he wants to protect his pal and he wants to protect Norman. Because to be a head of school there must be really quite a thing for your future. You get fantastic reference. You could hype up what you've done. So I think probably Drummond said to me, you owe it to me now. I think Drummond virtually dictated these letters. But one of them was so inaccurate that I wrote, because this one was sent to me as a draft copy when the SCA communicated with me. I don't know quite why they sent some, not others. They sent just this one. And I said, this is nonsense. I said, here's this boy saying that I was distraught, etc., etc., etc. And he says, the boy says, and Mr. Stock didn't have, well, virtually he's saying, any interest in pastoral affairs, because he turned down being a house tutor once, which I did. But he said a boy asked Mr. Stock to be house tutor, and he turned it down. Now, no boy asks anyone to be a house tutor. This boy writing in, I think he must be one from my fifth form, I don't know who it was, he couldn't have known I'd turned down being a house tutor. That was under McMurray. The boy wasn't even in the school then. So I wrote back to the SCAI and I said, this is nonsense. I said, it's wrong on account. There's no way does a boy invite someone. It's not democratic like that to become house tutor. And I said he couldn't have known it. The only way he could have known is that Drummond had access to my files and Drummond set it up. Now, I can't find that. I didn't keep a copy, unfortunately. No, I've looked everywhere. I haven't got a copy. And I wrote again yesterday to my minder. I said, look, you sent me stuff so far, references. This isn't it. I would like a copy of this draft statement. I think they've just cut it out. It's not in the printed report. And now they're not showing me because I told them, right, that it's set up by Drummond. And they should have seen, so as the Morrison, they must have had Morrison's name. You couldn't go to the SCAI surely and say I'm anonymous. You'd surely have to show who you were. You could be anybody. And then they'd say, okay, we won't put your name in the report, we'll give you an alias. You must know. But anyway, the boy Morrison actually says I was head boy, so you could find out. So why weren't they suspicious of his saying, oh, Drummond's a wonderful person, I can't imagine him not caring about bullying, when it was this boy himself who shut the kids up in Pinkie. Sent by Drummond to wander over to his pal M, in where Morrison had come from, Pinkie, and put they described the kids to me, how they were called into the study and threatened. Don't you ever say a word about any of this. And then about a week later, Ian Phillips was thrown out.
Okay. Well, David, I think we should close there. But just before we do, you've gone through this enormously elongated process over decades.
It's taken a long while,
right? Decades, where you've gone from being a teacher and you loved your job. I mean, I think the enthusiasm, maybe not on tape because we've spoken it more widely about this, your enthusiasm for the subject absolutely comes across.
Andy Marr is even there on record as having
and you took a stand to protect the boys from harm.
Can I interrupt that?
Yes.
When I said I wrote to the SCA and said, look, this boy writing in to you saying that David Stock turned down being a tutor, I said at the same time, I would like you, because you go on about my motivation being to get Drummond, I said I want you to put in there in your report that I was abused as a kid. I know what it feels like to have nothing happen. They wouldn't put that in. They refused to put that in.
Okay. So you responded to what you learned from the boys. It's cost you your job. You were forced out, non-disclosure agreements, and decades later, you're vindicated. The Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry does a certain amount, but the person who allowed the abuse to continue is still sitting teaching the head teachers of Scotland about leadership. Worries me quite a bit. And you've been through the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry. Have you any closing reflections on the whole process, what it's been like, or you know, just what's your overall thoughts on looking back on all of this?
Well, I think, well, there's two. One, I really object to charlatans and the idea that Drummond is still the bee's knees in Edinburgh society, because I've been on the receiving end. He's vicious, as Tank says. But the other is the SCAI. I mean, I read again the other day with interest the transcript of discussions, because you don't get the full weight in the report. You have to go deeper. And they do give Drummond a bit of a hard time. They actually mention boys having told him, but then I actually think they planned this. I mean, I remember reading about the Edinburgh's magic circle and corruption, and that's what I think now. I think that they've decided he's got a legal connection. Edinburgh society, it's so small. I think they've decided, well, we have to make him out to be bad. But they end it all by saying, oh, he's wonderfully I forget the word, wonderfully sincere and contrite. It's absolute paean of praise at the end. I couldn't believe it, because I know he lies. Now, the thing is, I told them at the beginning, I said, look, this is a man, he lies. Tank says it. So they just didn't approach with suspicion. And the area he's lying about the property most matters when he manages to confuse the November business, the essays and the previous term. Oh, dates don't matter. No, I think they're corrupt. Oh, and the other thing about that is I thought, right, I think they're corrupt. They got connections with private school. So I wrote under the Freedom of Information Act, said, well, would you please tell me, because I'm a bit cynical, what lawyers worked on the Loretto case, and I don't need to know their names, but what schools did they go to and how many went with? No, we're not eligible for Freedom of Information access. So I've now passed it to an MP, and that could possibly get somewhere if he asks a question in Parliament. But you can't do that very often, so he's not very keen to use his card.
One of the interesting problems that we face in the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry is the conflict of interest. I mean, I've written to them pointing out the abuse allegations against the Faculty of Advocates, and the fact that Lady Smith, as a member of the Faculty of Advocates, cannot be making decisions on that because of the conflict of interest. I didn't get any response. So conflicts of interest, lack of rigour, and an ability or a willingness or a desire to draw a discreet Edinburgh net curtain over the whole thing might be what we're dealing with.
Yeah. I mean, just the thing, I mean, okay, I could see that I could get the answer, it might be strictly true. Oh, thank you for your request under Freedom of Information Act, but sorry, can't help, we're not governed by the rule. So I wrote a bit later, I said, okay, I'm very suspicious. Why don't you allay my suspicions, if there's nothing wrong going on, by voluntarily telling me? No answer.
No answer? Oh, that was interesting. Okay. Can't answer that one. Yeah, the one thing I've learned about the law is what they don't say that matters.
Well, I've heard from Vanessa, I don't know how she knows, but she says she's sure of two of the lawyers on the, we'll call it the project, have a Loretto connection. They're very likely to. I mean, this is Edinburgh, private school, big things. Most lawyers seem to have gone through private school.
David, thank you very much for your time today. It's been lovely talking to you. We'll talk again soon, I hope. And until then, goodbye for now.
Right. Bye-bye. Camera's off.